to the rhythm, catching every beat. Together we embrace the futures at our feet. The futures at our feet.
Welcome to another episode of the Edufuturist podcast. This is episode 279, I think, something like that. It says 279, but we know that in the catalogue somewhere we've forgot to count and stopped counting, so it's well over 300 episodes. But we are excited to be back again doing a little bit of review. It's just me and Steve today. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, really good, thanks, mate. I've got my little merch on.
John, have you?
Absolutely, yeah, wearing it with pride today. You can't see the back. I'm not going to try and spin it round. I'll probably fall over or
Yeah, because
something.
you've just got no pants
on.
on, have you? That's what you're doing. You sat there with no
It's
pants
just
on.
if I had socks on, it'd slow me down and help the spin. But I don't want to get a friction burn on the bottom of my feet, and I don't want to fall over on for those people who are watching. But yeah, really good, thanks. Yeah, really good. I feel really alive after BETT, if I'm honest. And I know that we're gonna. Yeah, like everybody was like
invigorated, you mean?
Yes, yeah. I think many people have got BETT lag. I don't know if you've heard it as that.
Yeah, I've said that. It's cool, man.
BETT lag and flu and everything else. And I was like, you know what? I've come back and actually I feel all right. I feel really positive. It could hit me at the weekend. It could come at some point. But right now, I feel, and we had some. I know that we're going to get into it, but we had some really good conversations. And
yeah, we did.
And yeah, it was a very for Edufuture. It was the first time that we'd represented us as a collective, which was really nice. But yeah, how's things with you, mate? All right?
Yeah, good, man. Like, exciting. Obviously, it's, what is it, when this is going out, a couple of weeks after BETT, and it was straight into it. And I think you're right. You go on an adrenaline run, aren't you? You're buzzing that you've been around great people, and everybody who keeps posting things recently have been saying the best thing about BETT is actually the people and the connections. The tools are great. The events are great, the speakers are great, but actually about catching up with people and finding new friends and building them connections, it was incredible. So I think you run off the adrenaline of that and then straight back into it with kids, right? I've had a busy week and you've had a busy week, and yeah, first week in the new job, right? So I know that when this goes out, it'll have been 2 weeks, but when we're recording it, it's the end of week one, mate. It's been a whirlwind, hasn't it? But exciting as well.
Yeah, good. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, it'd been nice to just get back to the basics of just laying the foundations of and setting the stall out in regards to what our values and core principles are, what my honest approach is, and all those kind of things. Just getting back to just the core principles of me and how that can be built in, I think. And just going back, I think my week has been great. Last week was great. But from an Edufuturist point of view, I think the thing that I loved was actually you tilling my bet and us topping the bet. So we started a lot of people's bet week, and this is what will have gone out a couple of weeks ago in regard, and you'll have seen and listened to the podcast in regards to our approach and the presentation from the Canva event. For us to start a lot of people's bet journey and come down a little bit early before the Wednesday on the Tuesday night at Canva HQ was just a lovely, lovely thing. And so many people turned up, friends, new pit faces that weren't friends but now actually are. Some really positive things. Shout out to people like travel from Poland and Germany and Mumbai, and obviously some new friends in terms of like the head teacher chat and some really good people that just want to try and help at all different levels of education. But one of the pride feelings actually of last week, and I shared it with you and I'll say it again, is actually the last thing I did at BETT before I left to get my case was to watch you present and obviously launch your book, and that was really, really nice as well. It was a really good way to round up and finish the week. And for those Southerners that thought it was really bad weather, my train was fine. It was slightly windy. It was just weather of what we call it in the north. I know the Southerners call it bad weather, but we just call it weather.
Yes.
So yeah, it was all in. And actually, since we've come together, podcasts have come out, but we've done quite a few good ones. And one of yours, but maybe a good starting point is BETT ended with you presenting about your book, and it was launched at BETT and went on sale. But actually, me and you had a good conversation about it, didn't we? In terms of, I don't know whether you're going to review how you felt about that podcast as a guest. I don't think we considered that. How did you think it went, Ben? And what was your insights?
Well, yeah. So episode 276, we called it Schools as Ideas Factories, which we thought like, because we know that we talk about schools as exam factories. They feel like that's what they've been, but could schools be ideas factories, and what does it mean to have ideas? So yeah, it was strange and surreal, wasn't it? Like being interviewed about it rather than being an interviewer. So there is that, but it was a great conversation, and it was the first podcast that I did about the book, and it was the first one that went out. So it was nice to be able to showcase and talk about why I wrote the book. And you asked me some great questions about why did you call it the ideas guy? What's the heart behind that? Why do you want to do? What do you want people to? This was the bit that really landed for me. Was you asked what do you want people to do after they've read it, which was nice to make me think around. I don't just want to sell loads of books. That'd be a great thing. Like telling loads of books would be a great thing, but let's call it what it is. If it helps people, that I'd rather that. And if it's a smaller amount of people, we've talked about Alex Hermosi a few times before, that every organisation realistically needs 1,000 loyal customers or loyal fans. And if you get 1,000 that buy into who you are and what you do and are like advocates and ambassadors for what you do, you don't need tens of thousands, millions. You need people that are loyal, and so that's so that was cool. But yeah, it was a good conversation, and we dug into some of them people, didn't we? Yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.
I didn't, but we'll brush over that because I was the only one. I couldn't switch off. No, I'm only joking.
Yeah,
It was,
to be fair, I don't know how your messages carried on. Like, what are you doing?
I don't know, mate. I don't know.
You must have
It looked
lowered
like I
your
was
score
dead.
on Candy Crush.
I had loads of people phoning me going, "Are you okay? I've not heard from you for 15 minutes, 20 minutes." So, so yeah, it was really, really good. I like the stories in it. I like the application of context, and also that whole thing of so what, and also what now. You've written the book, people have read it. What now? And I think that's a really good telling bit, and the information's in the show notes of where you can get it. But obviously, listen back to the episode and think about if it resonates with you. If you think whether you agree with Ben's choices of people in there, and there's ideas and how you might apply it, or whether you just. I think that's the thing where positive conflict and disagreement is actually a good space to be in, as long as it's done with kindness. I wouldn't have that person. That's fine because it's Ben's choice. Your choice to read it, Ben's choice of who is. But who would you have picked, I suppose? It's that whole thing of if you had a dinner party, living or dead, who would you invite? Everybody's different. There isn't a right or wrong unless somebody says Satan or maybe that's a good, but then somebody go, actually, why would that? It's all of that thing. As long as it's explained, I think that's what I like about the book. And it's your choices, but then how might people take that and apply it to what their choice might be and their nest and their context as well. So yeah,
I think the other bit that sits in there as well is that it's okay to acknowledge that we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater just because somebody's got a bad reputation or has done some things recently or has got a checkered past or a checkered current or a checkered future, whatever that might look like. Yep. It's that ability to go, well, that's all right. Two things. One is that none of us are saints, so therefore it helps us realise that we don't have to be perfect. But second of all, we realise what can we take from somebody's life and realise that there is something that we can learn from, even somebody who's doing crazy things or has done crazy things or has treated people badly. There is something to take. Like the examples that we talked about, Musk and Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, they weren't particularly and aren't particularly lovely people. There's a lot of really bad stuff in their past. But you can't talk about innovation without talking about them too. Like it would be absolutely crazy not to. So yeah, it was good and interestingly that conversation and trying to push that movement, and I suppose it ties into our Edufuturists stuff. It'd be silly if I've written a book that it doesn't tie into the things that we care about in education and future of education. But that idea that Tig, you're it, and the idea that you're the ideas guy, it's not me, it's not them people. It's like, what have we got that's the inner genius in us and the ideas that we've got in us, and that's what's been nice. Some of the messages I've had since the episode, but since the book going out as well, have been around. It made me think a little differently. And it made me realise, oh, maybe I am going to start doing that thing that I've been wanting to do. So that's the win, and that's how it lands. So yeah, so that was pretty cool. We've got a few others that we review, and I know Steve's mentioned the Canva one. That's our most recent one, and that Edufuturist Wolfpack Community episode 278 with some pretty incredible guests and people from all around the world. But we presented where the trends are at now from 23-24 that we announced at Uprising in June last year, and we just basically expanded them based on what we've been picking since that point and what we learned up until that point. And then my favourite thing was these, actually. We had these little cards from people, and we heard other people's thoughts on what they thought about the future of education, what they were thinking about the trends. So even though we talked about holistic education, and we talked about technologies enabler, and we talked about culture first, and we talked about lifelong learning, we talked about them 4 things, actually, how does that resonate? And there's some really good, like you mentioned about positive conflict and about that radical candor stuff. There was some really different perspectives, and that's awesome. We're trying to build a community where it isn't just everybody saying the thing, and that somehow we're going to dictate what the future of education is. Who do we think we are if we're doing that? Who do we think, if we think we know what education is going to look like, then we're sadly mistaken. It's a we collective that build it together. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I think it goes against one of the slides, and one of the things that we talk about is ultimately creating a rainforest rather than cultivating the crop. If we're just basically saying, this is what example, this is how we've shackled, and this is the restrictions in education right now, to then put some new restrictions and shackles on them, it can only be this, is really in conflict to what we're trying to achieve anyway. What we're saying is, it could be many, many different things. It might follow these things. This is what we're thinking coming out of. But actually what that looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, can be very, very different from classroom to classroom, from space to space. And I think that's probably one of the challenges we've tried to create in our system, conformity and uniformity. Is that a word?
Yeah,
Where ultimately everybody's
yeah.
looking and doing and doing exactly the same thing. So, but actually, that isn't great when you're in very, very diverse spaces and everybody's different, that we try and create it. And Ben says it often, that one size fits all, and it just doesn't work. So the last thing we want to do is take this and then say, here's your box that you have to get back into now, and this is it. So it's really good for people to say, I think I disagree with that, and what about consider this? And I'm like, brilliant, absolutely, because it helps us reshape our imagination. It doesn't change what we stand for, but it's a part of the actual community, the voice of everybody, rather than just going, disagree, let's move on. Because I think that has been the stable for many, many people who've tried to influence, and also the people that continue to get paid in curriculum change and review. And we all know those behaviour SARs and all these other people, and you just go, bonkers, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is bonkers. And I think the idea that we can do this collectively and try and build something, and sometimes that's a bit difficult because you're wanting to push into the new, and you wanting to lead stuff, and I get that, like leadership, but actually that whole mantra of, if you want to go far, go alone, if you want to go fast, go alone, if you want to go far, go together, that's where we are. So yeah, we might go fast and we might be able to do that, and we know lots of people who are going fast and are flying, doing really well, but they're doing it on their own, or they're doing it in silos, and it's just their little club. We've made it really clear that the Wolfpack community is not that. We are in it for the long haul. We want to go far. We want to shape the future of education and be involved. And we also don't want to just talk about it. Pete Burgess, from Clever, who obviously Clever are involved in that event with us. Thank you, Tara and Pete, for being involved with us, and the wider Clever team as well for supporting it. And Pete said to me, he went, do you remember the Edufuturist Uprising that day after? What's happened since? And he started putting it was brilliant, lovely accountability, asking the questions. And he's like, what do we keep doing? It wasn't like pointing a finger at anybody, but what do we do? Because we want to keep talking. We love these conversations. And even some of the other people that we're going to talk about today, the conversations are incredible. The future education ideas are amazing, but ideas are only worth anything if they become actions and do something. So that's what it felt a little bit like, a mobilization of people to go, let's see through the BS of technology for technology's sake. Let's see through the BS of people who are in this to make a buck, or like book money, not make a book like that, but yeah, and maybe start thinking about, how do we bring everybody with us? Lovely. Like, I know we'll talk about it in a minute, but like, one of my favourite parts of BETT was speaking to some of the young people that were involved. So whether that was Zach Hanan or whether that was Lyra Layton from Beyond, like listening to them and their passion for the future of education, and then speaking to Andrew Slowinski, who talked about the future is in their hands. Like, let's really think about it. And some of you who haven't heard this stuff, it's coming, I promise. It's like, we've got this one coming out, and then BETT Part 1 is going to be out into the world the week after. Very, very excited to put that audio stuff out into the world. But some incredible conversations, and we were very, very blessed to be part of that on the Tuesday night, but blessed to be part of BETT, full stop. So yeah. Yeah, go on.
Going back to, I suppose, the first one that we did, I think it was way before yours in terms of the order when we recorded it, rather than actually Sophie Pickles. And actually, a really good. I caught up with Sophie, not for as long as we'd like, but really, really good to carry on those connections of actually some people that are changing the mantle, did it in education and stepped out of it. We learned a lot off air as well. We picked our brains in terms of how do we create a more successful YouTube channel. 50,000 plus YouTube subscribers in terms of our parent channel.
We're just going to pay her to manage our social YouTube. No, I'm joking.
Written another person. It seems like everybody's written a book apart from me. That's one of the things I've got to reflect on in 2025. I'll get a pamphlet out. It'll probably be just HOPE, and it'll be or something just to say I've written a book. Because people keep giving me hammer for it. But she'd written one in regards to, I think it was like a mud kitchen book. And then, so there was all that. And then just her experience of student-led learning in the early years, curriculum, her beliefs, how it's transcended, how it really successful, actually. I thought, and actually the idea is a really, really lovely one, where what is the ideology, or what was her hope and her utopia that she's aiming for? When they got there, also, what is the restrictions of why more people aren't adopting it? Is it knowledge? Is it fear? Is it the shackles of systems? Is it, and then also that linking into actually parent pressure and external stakeholders, because they've never seen it or felt it before, and the whole society around education is tell us the grades, tell us the marks, show us a certificate, and actually it's harder to show those things that Sophie had worked on with in her time in education and she talks about, because it doesn't see the return on grades, even though it's the right thing to do. It's a harder turnaround, it's a harder thing to do and achieve. So yeah, I don't know about your thoughts, mate.
And that's really interesting. I really enjoyed spending time with Sophie in Dubai, but also in this conversation that we had. And then, like you said, when we were down at BETT, and I'll talk about her reflection on BETT as well, because that's quite an interesting one. But the whole way that bringing play back, that's what we called it, that episode, bringing play back, like, that sounds like fun. Sounds like something that you're creating a place where young people want to be. And we often talk about this, and I think it was mentioned in the podcast where we talk about the research that found that 95% of 5-year-olds would be classed as geniuses. And then by the time they leave school, that number is in the less than 20%. And you think, what does school do? And what, from nursery and from that free play and what does school do in terms of taking that genius out of people, which obviously I'm passionate about. I put the word genius in the subtitle of my book, right? So I'm conscious of that. But Sophie seems to have a perspective with so much experience in creating content and creating curriculum, but also parenting content, like you've mentioned, but curriculum that is focused on child development and holistic child development, but also doing that in a way that doesn't have to be rote, doesn't have to be structured in the same like mechanical way, but structured in the same way. Like, this is the bit, like, most people who don't understand Montessori or Emilio Reggi, like they think it's just free for all, do what they want. It absolutely isn't. If you literally look at the environment, and I know you have, because you literally went into this with your own children, that conversation, and looking at that as an environment, that environment and the learning environment is so well thought through and planned, that prepared environment, that is fundamental. It doesn't work without it. It's not like, well, but you create opportunity for young people to make that level of autonomous agency decision for themselves. It's just beautiful. And tied to that, I think, Sophie put out a really poignant and I think honest post out on LinkedIn post BETT, and I imagine there'll be some people that weren't happy about that, and I think well done to her, because she said that she was disappointed in some ways about how it seemed to be she expected more of it. And do you know what? I understand that. I really do understand it, that it feels sometimes that technology piece and that we're trying to push for technology's sake. We're not always thinking curriculum. We're thinking that there's so many people that are still trying to make technology do that first level of SAMR model, like just substitute a worksheet for a digital worksheet or substitute an exam for a digital exam. Yes, but there's way more. And I think her approach to play and her approach to curriculum design and then pedagogy that comes out of it, it resonates with me. And I just think, how do we make that more normalized? I wrote something recently, and I'll let you. I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, Steve. I promise. I wrote something, and I said, in education, in fact, it was in the Edufuturists newsletter. In education, perhaps there's too much stuff and not enough space. Too much stuff and not enough space, and that's where I think that summarizes where we are right now.
I agree. And if you look at curriculum, is it the wrong curriculum, or is it just too much stuff in that curriculum? So trying to pick out, actually, when you're just trying to fill it and there's too much stuff, how do we create spaces to be creative, to play, to explore, and allow that curiosity when, if within an hour, 45 minutes of that is actual content that needs to be given and talked at, that doesn't really allow application, curiosity, exploration, context. It allows for hopefully information to be given and information somehow, don't know how, to be retained and then regurgitated. I get knowledge is key, but where knowledge comes from and how that knowledge base is developed is questionable. That actually, when you think about your education and those bits, that we need to allow those bits, and thinking about play and thinking about creativity and all those kind of things. Sir Ken Robinson, probably, I think it's still the most watched or watched TED Talk, or one of. Is it just schools killing creativity? Or is it killing actually a lot more than that in terms of loads more C's, even just throwing curiosity? Because we talk about this compliance piece, that actually creativity, but curiosity, the thing I love about young children and that genius that you talked about is it the fact that they're genius, or actually they're just allowed to explore something that they love and the elements of learning that they love, whereas actually we then try and define genius in 7 categories that are on a national curriculum or an IBAC or anything that really isn't actually what made them a genius in the first place, because they don't love it. They didn't want to do maths. So they don't actually, the play and the exploration bit is because they were allowed to explore their passion and their fun and their enjoyment of something. And I think, is it that they were geniuses, or is it the fact that they probably maybe are still geniuses, but we just don't allow them to be genius in their field and focus on something that they never wanted to do in the first place?
Yeah, and I think it's just on a tangent, but that's definitely related. I was thinking about, I met a couple of pretty exceptional musicians recently who run a music school in Liverpool, and they teach music. And they have a really unique, brand new methodology for teaching music. It's incredible. Like, watch this space for Intro to Music, the stuff that they're doing out of there. I think it's going to blow. And I got to meet them, and Alex, he's a classically trained, incredible pianist. He went to Cambridge University, I think, and he studied music. He's a genius music-wise. Loves it. They have a fantastic grand piano that you listen and you just think, this lad's just special. But Tasha, who's his business partner in there, she's also incredible. She plays loads of instruments, and her son Sammy has been on the TV a few times for that TV show called The Piano. You might have seen it, and he's been on it a couple of times. But he's homeschooled now. In fact, him and his elder sister have both been homeschooled. And I said to her, how does that work? Like, with your work and your business and your partner's business and all this kind of stuff? And she just said, Sammy loves music. He plays music all the time. He's on Logic. He's creating stuff on Ableton and all the stuff on his software, as well as playing. He plays a few instruments. He loves football. He reads, but he reads in a different way. He doesn't do like novel books. And he's developing a set of skills. and he's flourishing and he loves that. And now, in some ways, some people go, "What? So? But what about his science? And what about his French? And what about?" And I understand that. I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong, but it's also really interesting that this kid is living his passion as a young teen. He's living in that passion space and loving life, as opposed to speaking to a good chunk of teenagers that accept that school is a necessary evil. They go because they have to go. They don't love it. They go because they love the friends and it's a social space. And 90% of what they're learning, do they really care about? And not only do they really care about it, do they really need it? And it's been decided by somebody else. I just think there's so much opportunity, and I don't really know the answer apart from allowing that space for curiosity and allowing more space. And I wonder whether the answer isn't to try and get to the top of the PISA tables in terms of like scores and performance tables, but perhaps just could be. And you've said this multiple times, Steve. Maybe what we're looking for is kids to be happy and to thrive. And what about that as a measure? Like, forget about it being a formal measure that's like this number score in this. Like, just they enjoy learning, they love life, the happiness scores go through the roof. Guess what would happen to the world? It'd change because you get people that really cared. You'd have loads of people who are like me, who just love loads of stuff and have got a broad set of interests, and you get some people that have been narrow and it'd all work. I think anyway, maybe I'm naive, but I just don't get this drilling content heavy substance stuff rather than creating space. I think I'd love to see what a school that created space would look like, and I think Sophie talks about that heavily. And do you know, we've got a couple of other episodes that were incredible, and one of those, episode 275, was with Leisa Grace Wilson. And Leisa is obviously doing incredible stuff working out in the Emirates, and been out there a while, and she was talking about community and about teacher development, and I think there's a real link here. We're talking about student well-being and student happiness, and she was talking about how do we build a community and collaborative culture for our educators that we grow and professionally develop. And them two things are not mutually exclusive. They are definitely interlinked, aren't they?
I think so. I think whether those are physical spaces, whether those are online spaces, whether those are spaces just to just breathe and come together in whatever way. So we talked about the evolution of school buildings in the UK and everywhere, and actually in her, she's had the ability when she's moved out to the Emirates to be involved in some school designs and creating spaces that the school will develop into. Whereas actually what's happened is we built school buildings and we've never really gone back to some of the purposes, the social spaces for kids, but also the social spaces for educators. Ben, you told a story about when you joined and started your life in education, and how you were helped by different people in the staff room and all those bits. And that community. And we also then talked about it in the context of expats, the fact that a lot of people are moving out there for the first time with families. Isolation can be one thing, or young professionals. How do you build a community online to develop all of those and just give them the freedom? I think it's all of those things. And I think education can be a lonely place, and also is often, even within the same organisation, a space where the wheel is invented and reinvented or tried to be invented a million different times. I'm just like, all of those resources have ever been there. Where is the central hub where anybody can go in and pick a resource that somebody's created? And it isn't just maths or English or anything else. Where is that space where somebody can go and go, I need a lesson and I'm thinking about this, or an activity, and actually picking those bits out. But just going back to the core principle of spaces, professional development and communities in organisations, in silos, in villages, in community. Actually, a lot of those spaces are dying out because of lack of investment centrally into those spaces. So community spaces, youth clubs, all that, like you go into, and those are the bits where actually that is the first thing to be ripped out of anywhere.
Yep.
Especially in the UK.
Yeah, and it 100%. Like that my background before getting into teaching was in youth work, and I started actually volunteering, working at youth clubs when I was 12 years old. I was a youth myself, and I was already involved, and then I led that from 16 years old for a good 10 years of them youth clubs that were full, that had loads of kids in them. They were wild. We did all sorts of stuff in that space, and we had a youth club at the bottom of our street that I used to go to. It was thriving hub. Now gone. The big youth zones that have all started in all these towns, dwindling numbers, kids. And interestingly, it's funny because when we were kids, and you'll be probably the same, Steve, you were probably playing football all the time like I was, but you're on the streets, there were gangs of, and you don't want to call them gangs, but groups of kids like hanging in places, like whether that was on playing football on a street corner, on a field, or you were terrorising the park, or whatever else you're doing. You don't see them. It's weird. You just don't see him as much. You still see him. You see, there used to be every night. First thing I wanted to do was like, my mum always made me do my homework as soon as I got in. But I'd do my homework and then as soon as I could get out, I'd be out. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, because it probably still does. But that isolation and elements in that space, but I also think that there are a whole host of social fabric challenges that don't exist, that existed when we were kids, whether that was, like you say, youth clubs, community centres, churches, all them other things that people were involved with is less involved. And I wonder whether that has then contributed to the fact that we're in a place where there's a massive individualistic society, and school is the only opportunity for some of these people to do social stuff in a physical building.
Yeah, I agree. I think from that point of view, like, how do people share their challenges, be honest in regards to failures, tackle improvement, have conversations, think about learning, all those if there's not an opportunity or a space for that? And I think there isn't, and I'm not saying it's linked, but could that be a correlation of why people are, the retention of amount of people that start and actually leave within a certain period of time, because they aren't learning from. We've got a young demographic in regards to, and I don't know about the workforce, but when I was in, I think it was like the second or the third youngest teaching population in Europe. Fine, but also as those people in terms of that are not staying. If actually a lot of people are leaving at the age of whatever age, there isn't that old head in the staff room, that positively old head. There isn't those people that have gone through those experiences that can share, that can nurture, that can develop others, because it's just a constant conveyor belt of in and out and in and out. And how do we tackle that? And is that actually by creating spaces and professional communities of practice and spaces and professional development that is about learning and helping early years or early careers educators, even if they're early or they've got experience early in that environment, maybe. So if they've moved from primary to secondary, moved to country, all of those. And I think Leisa and the team are doing some great work in regards to actually putting on some stuff. And the way that you evidence whether it's actually working is the number of people that they're getting to these events, where you say, come along and we'll have a coffee in a space and some opportunities to just learn and connect. If hundreds of thousands of people are turning up at the point, or hundreds of people on a regular, you know that you're in the right space and that's needed. You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, agreed. And interestingly, to tie to that, put some stats. I was looking at some stats the other day from the DFE, and in autumn last year, to autumn 2024 in the UK, there were 111,000 something, like almost 112,000 students homeschooled, elected homeschools, and that's the ones that forget about like bad attendance, were actually elected for full homeschool. That's up 20,000 in 12 months. Those numbers are like, add that together.
You add that to the, I think, and I'd have to find the stat. So this is thinking, I think this is a statistic where it's now around 1.8 million of people that are not in education, that have dropped out and are not in. So you add that to that mix. You add that then to those people that are not homeschool, but also those growing populations of online school, all of those kind of bits, and you go, I think it's working. Well, there's millions of people that are demonstrating and it's not working, and there is a different way now. That's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, when you're looking at stats to work out whether something's successful or not, if you're looking at the amount of staff that leave within the first 5 years and the retention crisis and upskilling crisis, the amount of kids and parents that are electing for something else, the amount of kids that don't go to school, the third of students don't pass and get that required from maths and English from leaving. Like, that doesn't sound like if that was a business, you'd be thinking to yourself, hold on a minute, have a look. But yeah, and obviously our final well, it's the first one actually. We've gone backwards a little bit. Episode 274 was with our old mucker, Mr. Fitzpatrick, and Dan was talking about his new book, Infinite Education. And I know that you, Steve, were involved at an event that Dan run, EdCop, and conversations around this idea of education being an infinite game, building on the work of James Carson and Simon Sinek, education being an infinite game rather than being a finite game. And it's interesting because maybe some of the things that we're thinking about there, obviously it's going to cross over. Dan was with us as Edufuturists for a long time. I think there's a theme that suggests that if we keep measuring things in a finite way, as if there's an end line, then perhaps that's why education works like it is, because a certain government comes in or a certain new education minister comes in, and we've got to be seen to doing something. There's got to be something measurable that's tangible in a short period of time. But yeah. Interesting thinking about it as an infinite game. Yeah,
absolutely. And when we talk about, obviously I've read the books and I've read Dan's book and everything else, but when we talk about any infinite game, I don't know why, but my head always goes back to the 1980s Nike advert, "There is no finish line." And the advert isn't actually written about the infinite game. It's not about everything else. It's about one person running trainers and the road. And actually, it's not about completing a marathon, a runner, and the whole ethos was around actually how do we support you to be healthier and happier and all that thing. And I've linked it through my leadership work and career now. Wow, is it a career? Am I a leader? Don't know. Still checking and thinking about that. But as I have applied it to innovation, I've applied it to leadership, I've applied it to it, that there is no finish line. I mentioned it today that Ofsted should not be the bar that we think is an end result and should really is a result. But ultimately, it's an endless cycle of, yes, the point where we look at something and go, okay, great, but we should only then go look how far we've come. And I think that infinite game, there is no finish line thing, all comes back to the same mentality of it's just an endless cycle of, and a tiring cycle where you take some breathers, you relax. Yes, there's some points where you take a stop. You might take a breather, you might have a cup of tea, you might refresh, relax. But ultimately, you don't stop like you do at a race. You don't complete, get a medal. We do in our system, but I think we need a change because it isn't a marathon or a sprint. It isn't a race. It isn't something that we should measure by a gold medal or a medal around people's necks. We need to celebrate different benchmarks and things. Celebrate the journey. I've run marathons. Ben, you've run a marathon. Actually, the hard work isn't the marathon itself often. Is actually the reason that you were successful and you've completed all of the training and all the journey that you've actually had that's longer than just that 26 miles. And I think life is like that. And education actually has to follow life, and lifelong learning is key and fundamental to everything.
Do you know what's really interesting though? As you were saying that, I was thinking, I'm glad that it ended at that marathon finished after 26.1 miles. But I know what you said. Like, you're absolutely right. That if we treat education and we treat learning and we treat school as that, where you've just got, you did it faster than I did, but 4 or 5 hours of that's it. That's all I'm working for. The truth is that most people who run, and I know you still run, Steve. I can't at the moment, but you still run. Most people who run don't run just so that they can do a race. And so, I'm always beating my 10K pace, or I'm always looking to get my next marathon. I'm looking. Some people do, I get it, but most people run because they want a longevity of life. They want to be able to do that with friends. I was speaking to somebody just last night who enjoys running with other people because it's a social element. And actually, there's a big thing around our mental health in that space as well. So yeah, it's been a really good season, hasn't it? And it's been a really good season of podcasts, and we've got some incredible ones coming, as well as the BETT ones that are coming out. We've got some incredible people from across the pond and in this country, and other countries as well. So we're looking forward to doing that. And remember, we are building this Wolfpack community. There's lots and lots of things on the horizon in that, but one of the things that you can definitely guarantee is having a great time in Manchester on the 26th of June. Come and join us, get the tickets. The links for that are in the show notes. Come and get the tickets for that, be involved with that, and we'll look forward to another episode of the podcast coming up very, very soon. It's always good to chat to you, bud, and it's always good reflecting back on what we've done. We've created space, haven't we? We haven't done new stuff. We've just created space around the stuff we did. Maybe a good idea.
Reflect. Have a wonderful time listening, everybody, and just continue to give us feedback as well. And next guests, next ideas, next focus would be always a good thing. But yeah, cheers, Ben.
Amazing. Thanks, buddy. Take care.
Cheers, mate.